Hello, welcome to a session where I plan to go through the Norman Conquest paper, or an example of the Norman Conquest paper, which is a component of the OCR B School Histories Project GCSE History. At Norton College we pair this with Crime and Punishment, but it can be paired with any thematic study like medicine through time, or immigration through time, or migration through time as it's known as. But we've broken it down just to the Norman Conquest here. One, so you can pick and choose whether or not you want to watch crime and punishment videos or whether or not you want to watch these. But also, so you can get yourself prepared for any mocks that you might be having, any assessments you might be having. So, without further ado, let's get into the Norman Conquest paper. Now, the first thing you'll be presented with in the Norman Conquest paper is this, the 3 and the 5 marker. These two questions are paired, which means that they come together and they're linked together, and I'll show you how you can use that link later on. But the first question is this 3 marker. It's a little bit more awkward than the 1 markers in the Crime and Punishment of the Viking paper, in that you have to think more about what you're saying. It can't be like just a little blithe one-off comment. And you'll be able to see this here. Here you've got this interpretation of a early Norman castle built in Newcastle. And the question 6A says, in interpretation here, the artist portrays early Norman castles as a means of control. Identify and explain one way in which he does this. Now, some people might just go, oh, it has a keep on the moat, which means, well, even then, it has a keep on the moat. That's going to be 1 mark. You've got to add something extra. In the exam mark scheme, it's explicit that the mark scheme works as 1 + 1 + 1. So you might say there's a moat with a keep on top of it, which means that the Norman soldiers in the castle will have a good view of the area, which means it might help prevent rebellion. That there is going to get you 3 marks. You have to imagine it almost like a flow chart. So I can see this, which means this, which would have meant this. And you can see some examples here. So if you have a look through the mark scheme there, you'll see the first one says, the artist, well, the first example and the bullet point, it says, the artist shows a dark scheme, which suggests this is a time of trouble and violence, which is why the castle is there. It doesn't just leave it there though, it carries on. Goes on, the Norman soldiers and the defensive features are shown in light to make them stand out as formidable and in control. That's an extra mark. The castle's dominant position and the fact that light is used to make it stand out against the background make it appear even more formidable and dominating. Yeah, you can. This means you can. You look at this. This means you can also use design features of the interpretation. You don't necessarily have to just use what you can see. You can use any shading, any colours that the artist has used to help you come to your conclusion when making your answer for this one. So remember, not just one blithe comment, saying something you notice. What does that mean? What does that mean again? That will get you the 3 marks. Now this 5 marker is a question that's caused a lot of your pain and torment because it's quite an awkward one. If you read through it, it is by far the most difficult question to comprehend on the exam paper. If you were asked to do further research on one aspect of interpretation here, what would you choose to investigate? Explain how this would help us to analyse and understand the first modern Bailey castles built by the Normans. Yeah, myself, Mr. Evans, Miss Taylor, several other history teachers we talk to say they have a very hard time breaking down where the marks come from on this. So what we've done is we've looked at a slew of exemplar answers and we've managed to actually pick up where the 5 marks are gained. And in actuality, it becomes a lot easier when you think about it like this. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to understand that the mark scheme itself specifies that there are 2 marks for AO1 and 3 marks for AO2. Now just to let you know, AO1 is knowledge marks and AO2 is explanation marks. This is where you're using your second order concept, cause, consequence. Why is this here? What would it mean? What would it lead to? and those are worth 3 marks. If you're not doing those, you're not getting the marks. Another thing you need to do is read through the question. What is it actually specifically asking you about? If you were asked to do further research on one aspect of interpretation here, what would you choose to investigate? There's a lot of waffle there. Explain how this would help us to analyse and understand the first Motte Bailey castles built by the Normans. Brilliant. Essentially, you've got to look at this interpretation and say, what does it tell us about the first Motte Bailey castles built by the Normans? Now this here is an okay answer. It ticks some of the boxes and it gets some of the second order concepts correct. Now I'm going to read through it, and as I'm reading through it, I want you to think about where has the author used ideas like cause, consequence, significance, and comparison, change, where they used all these sort of word terms like leading, this would have meant. Have a think as I'm reading through it. If I were asked to do further research on interpretation A, I would choose to look at the presence of soldiers at the Motte Bailey castles. This would be particularly interesting because I'd like to know if the first Motte Bailey castles all had soldiers based in them. It would reveal if the Normans were worried about dealing with rebellions and instability in England, causing them to use soldiers in these castles. This would be important because it would tell us whether the castles were built mainly for military purposes rather than other reasons such as status or administration of land. So have a think about where the second order concepts are in there. Now if you look here where I've highlighted, it only really uses like a second order concept there where it's in causing in the middle, and it's letting a lot of marks go. There's certainly a lot of AO1 there, there's certainly knowledge marks there, but it's letting the second order concept marks slide a little bit. So let's have a think about how we can target that. There are 3 marks there, that's a grade boundary. Now here are 2 major tips I use when looking at the 5 markers, and I've found it makes the process of planning a 5 marker a lot easier. So firstly, we've got to be painfully aware that the mark scheme is asking for just 2 AO1 there, just the 2 AO1, which means 2 pieces of knowledge, whereas it's asking for 3 second order concept marks, 3 explanation marks essentially. So we need to be explaining ourselves a lot more in our answers than perhaps our previous one was. Now, another tip is you can actually use the first question almost as a hint as to where you can take the direction of your answer. So when you've read through 6b, have a look at A. Have a look at A and see what it's talking about. In interpretation A, the artist portrays early Norman castles as a means of control. So you could potentially look at the interpretation and see how the artist has made the early Norman Motte Bailey castles look like a means of control. On the next slide I'll show you how. Now here's a second model. This is almost like a waggle, like what a good one looks like. Whilst reading through it, I want you to think about where AO1, the knowledge, is shown, and where AO2, the explanation, is shown, the second order concept. So as I read through it, have a think about those 2 things. I would investigate how typical interpretation A is to show us how early Norman castles were used to control. I know that William often built these castles out of wood, which I can see in the interpretation, meaning the interpretation shows us accurately that early castles were at risk of being burnt by the Anglo-Saxons. Furthermore, I know William's early castles had a keep built on a motte, which I can also see in the background, meaning William's soldiers could see incoming threats coming from a distance, suggesting interpretation A accurately depicts how early Norman castles controlled the Anglo-Saxons. So just have a think about where the author has used knowledge and where they have explained themselves. And here you can see where the author has used both AO1 and AO2. The yellow is the AO1 and the green is the AO2. I know that William often built these castles out of wood, meaning the interpretation shows us accurately that early castles were at risk of being burnt by the Anglo-Saxons. Then, I know William's early castles had a keep built on a motte, meaning William's soldiers could see incoming threat coming from a distance. Brilliant. This is going to hoover up the marks there. So think of it almost as, what knowledge can I bring into this investigation? And what is that going to mean? And how does it answer the question?